You caught the sun, Roger.
Yeah, I did actually.
Yeah.
Because normally, these lights, they've got a red tint, but I put the white ones on, but it looks like the red tint one, doesn't it? But anyway.
Kind of, yeah.
So, Earthlings, welcome along to another special with this guy. This is Ronnie Lee, and
also known as see my mug, also known as Mr. Pussy Magnet. Here we are.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good start, Ronnie. What I do want to say, because it's worth repeating, nothing to do with that, but to do with your 50th year of veganism. So again, congratulations on that. And so it's good to see that you're still toddling around, and that you're breaking all the stereotypes of that. But it's really interesting because there's an article in one of the Forza vegan mags. And I think they were interviewing 4 vegans who were vegan a little bit longer than you. So it's not becoming so rare now, is it?
I know several vegans who have been vegan longer than me.
Yeah.
And some of them are vegans I knew way back in the day.
There's loads of people been vegan longer than me, and I'm on 43 years, and people kind of go, but then again, when some of the influencers declare that they've been vegan for 7 years, people go, "Oh no, how could you?" And this kind of stuff.
How could you survive?
Right. What we want to do at the beginning is give a bit of a shout out to Carolyn Harris. She's got a radio show in Canada and also a podcast, and it's called Always for Animal Rights, as you can see there. And if you notice, the latest episode is interview with who? Oh, Ronnie Lee. So you were the last one, Ronnie. So I actually heard it. I started listening to it because I just moved into a new place and I just got a brand new bed, and I fell asleep listening to it, and so I had to finish off the thing at the next morning. So you drove me to sleep on my first night in the new place, so thanks very much.
Perhaps you could recommend it to insomniacs. Perhaps
you probably could. So this is Always for Animal Rights. So that's episode 80. Look at that, episode 79. Ooh, look who this is. So that's me as well. So we're both in there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to also show people the archive. There's a lot of good stuff here. I recently revisited this one, episode 53, with vegan sociologist Kate Stewart and Matthew Cole, who are kind of friends with me, and they do a lot about socialization. Really shows about the importance of sociology within the movement. So this is a really good archive for people to check out. So Carolyn, you're doing a great job, and we wanted to give you a shout out to begin this. We've done that. The idea today is to kind of figure out, this is a kind of generational thing, but both long-term vegans, and we want to talk about the kind of generational things that we're perceiving. I was actually going to do a podcast before this one with some younger vegans, but that's been pushed back, so it'll have to be the other way round in a way. What I want to do is figure out if vegans, generally speaking, have a different mindset now to, say, the vegans of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s and 90s. What is your initial response to that idea, Ronnie?
I kind of think they do. I mean, when you say young vegans, probably more accurate term might be new vegans, people that's kind of more recently become vegan. And I mean, most of them are young, but not all of them are young. But kind of even the older ones that have recently become vegan often tend to have the same attitude as the younger ones, and is kind of different to the attitude that we had back in the day, and it's different in, I think, more than one way. I mean, first of all, you go back to the kind of 70s, 80s, even into the 90s. If someone was a vegan then, there was a very strong chance that they were also an activist, and many people kind of, in a sense, became activists before they became vegan, because there wasn't really any vegan activism in those days. It was activism against animal experiments, against hunting, against the fur trade, for instance. And a lot of people would come into these things not being vegan and then become vegan by rubbing shoulders after rubbing shoulders with other vegans that were involved. The situation now is really totally the reverse, where most vegans these days aren't activists in any way. That's the first thing. The second thing tends to be that vegans today tend to regard veganism really more as a diet. A lot of them, I think it's a diet. I think it's just all about avoiding animal products. Whereas, of course, veganism is much more than that. It's a philosophy of animal liberation, opposed to all the exploitation and oppression of other animals in any way. You know, back in the day, we realised that although we didn't campaign on veganism, we did appreciate that veganism didn't just cover diet, and that it covered all these other things as well. And that's a kind of major difference.
Well, of course, vivisection was much more prominent in the 80s, and so that was more like the focus, wasn't it? And so that therefore the focus wasn't on the diet in that sense. And then you've got the issue, of course, that a lot of SABs weren't vegan, a lot of ALF people weren't vegan, a lot of anti-vivisectionists weren't vegan. So is there a possibility here, Ronnie, and we have to be honest with ourselves here, is there a possibility that we're a couple of boring old farts and we kind of misremembering the past? I mean, is this kind of division between vegans and activists always been there, but because of the size of the movement now, it's a bit more obvious or something like that?
I think there were always vegans that weren't activists. Before the sort of rise of the animal rights movement, I think vegans, the relatively small number of vegans that existed before them, they weren't activists. And in fact, they were into some very... I remember going to a vegan side garden party. I was invited because they were when I became vegan, they celebrated.
Yeah, I've heard this story before.
We got another vegan. That's 2 this year. You know, it's only February, and I got invited to this garden party, and there were the most strange people at this garden party, into all sorts of like really weird and wonderful stuff.
So you really fitted in, Ronnie.
I really fitted in. I kind of, you know, I held fast to my veganism despite the kind of strange people I was surrounded with. And it was only when, you know, the concept of animal rights, animal liberation arose in the 1970s, but people got involved in that movement, and then they became vegan. And a lot of those people were, you know, they were kind of more ordinary, shall we say, in a sense, you know, just kind of ordinary people that, you know, were opposed to animals being oppressed and wanted to take action against them, and then against that, and then found out about veganism and went vegan. And so that's kind of when it changed. It was really in the 70s that you had this you know, big increase in veganism, a big rise, relatively speaking, in the number of vegans. And most of the new vegans then in the 70s and then 80s and into the 90s actually were activists. And so that it ended up with the majority of vegans then being activists.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, I do wonder whether we're in danger of just misremembering it in a sense, but I know what you mean. Veganism as the moral baseline has really kind of changed the movement in that sense. What you said about diet, I think that most people would claim it was a lifestyle. I think at least they'd say that. In fact, I think a lot of the people who we talk about as non-active are probably would be arguing with people that veganism is not a diet. So I think there's that a little bit. And also the thing about activism, I think even if you look back at the vegans in the vegan society, the prominent ones in the 50s and 60s, I think they would see themselves as activists in the sense that they were giving a lot of talks. They were doing even kind of talk tours, you know, going throughout Britain and then going to Ireland, that kind of thing. And also there would be a lot of correspondence with government departments, and also a lot of correspondence with food manufacturers, because that was before the time of labels. And so therefore they had to, you know, you had to ask companies, didn't you, if things were vegan? You couldn't just read the label in those days, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think the kind of, we might say, the prominent figures in, you know, the vegan society did do that and kind of were activists in that sense. But the kind of people that just were vegan, you know, the ordinary, so to speak, vegans, weren't activists. And I think that's kind of where the difference was. And then you've got a situation where, with the rise of the animal rights movement, a lot of kind of the ordinary vegans then, or the majority of ordinary vegans then, were activists.
Yeah, and then a lot of people came into activism who weren't vegan as well. I mean,
yes.
What's happened as a kind of echo of all that is that a lot of people come into the modern day vegan movement who are not left leaning, and so this is the more kind of structural political thing, is the fact that pretty much everybody I met, and obviously there were individuals, but pretty much everybody I met, if I think about Liverpool or places like Essex, you know, all I mean, there were some middle class people, but they're all left leaning. And of course, I think that has changed now, you know, because you've got a kind of entrepreneurial spirit and this kind of stuff nowadays. So I think that's not necessarily kind of left leaning, although there are left entrepreneurs and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's another kind of change. So you could say that the first wave of change is when activists came into the movement alongside the vegans, but the vegans became activists as well. And now we've got the political thing, which is, well, that might be a little bit of a tangent, really, but it's certainly something that has kind of shaken up the vegan movement a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of not really a tangent. I tend to think if you've got a whole load of people these days who are vegan, that, you know, the general consensus of it would be left leaning. As a whole, there'd be some in there that were right wing, and so unfortunately there might be very right wing in their other views. But I think, generally speaking, it would be towards the left even now. Perhaps not as much as it used to be, but I think it still would be.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's worth defining what we mean by left leaning. I mean, I tend to use what Steve Best said in you know, his famous Total Liberation speech, which is kind of, you know, incorporating the anarchists and the communists right through to kind of left-leaning liberals, he said. So it's a very kind of broad church, but kind of left-leaning. So it kind of goes into the centre of politics, but the left-leaning side of it.
If you are wanting to kind of incorporate politics in veganism, which I think you have to do, and I think, you know, in a sense, veganism is kind of politics as well. This, you know, even a lot of those kind of left-leaning vegans, there'd be stuff in their philosophy that wasn't really in accordance with vegan principles. I mean, for instance, there's a Kerry McCarthy, the vegan MP for one of the Bristol constituencies. She voted in favour of the renewal of the UK's nuclear weapons. Now, how can that be consistent with vegan principles to support
nuclear weapons are not nuclear power? Because I know that the arguments have changed about power, but not about weapons, right?
Nuclear weapons.
No, right.
How can that be consistent with vegan principles?
Well, I think one answer to that is politics, in the sense that, you know, you have to sometimes toe the party line against because, you know, it's all about, you know, doing the possible and making compromises and all that, which is why campaign groups and social movement organizations tend to be very frustrated when they have anything to do with politicians, because the social movements want a certain thing and the politicians are kind of dancing around it, and you're going, no, we want this, you know, ban on hunting, say, or, you know, something. And the politicians are going, well, what about this and what about that? And then, you know, when you actually get what you want, it doesn't turn out to be what you actually wanted in the first place. So I think that kind of answers that. What I wanted to do at this stage is just to set us up for the rest of the show, if you like. I want you to revisit your kind of schema about what you think is the crucial parts of what's needed to achieve animal liberation. So I'm inviting you to kind of briefly kind of recap on all that for the viewers who've not seen that. In terms of this idea of go vegan, be active, and then be an organizer. So for you, this is the crucial part of the movement from now on, right?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that vegan education is crucial for the achievement of animal liberation. And the reason for that is unless we have a large number of people who are opposed to speciesism and human supremacism, that is never going to end. That's never going to end while it's only a tiny majority of people that are opposed to it. And so we have to hugely increase the number of vegans. And there's kind of two reasons we need to do that. I mean, first of all, it's kind of the impact that people have as consumers and through their lifestyles, withdrawing their support from the industries of animal oppression. And secondly, how those people behave politically. If we have more vegans, we'll have more vegan politicians, and we'll have more vegans to vote for them. And kind of going back to what you said before about, the way politics and politicians behave, what we have to do is replace those politicians with politicians that are truly vegan, and then those people would behave according to the principles of veganism and animal liberation. In order to do all that, we've got to massively increase the number of vegans. The only way we do that is through vegan education, and the only people who can do vegan education are vegans. So therefore, it's vital that as many vegans as possible are involved in education. With doing education, yes, there's a lot of vegan education that people can kind of do on their own. I mean, I do it myself. I leave leaflets around in public places and that kind of thing. But to be really effective, we need to kind of have, I think, groups of people doing it. So we can do information stalls and other events that involve more people. I suppose my message to humanity, I suppose, in a sense, not just vegans, is I'd say, well, if you're not vegan, go vegan. If you're vegan but not an activist, become an activist. And if you're a vegan activist but not an organizer, become an organizer and become an instigator of vegan outreach. And that way, that's the way we'll maximise the amount of outreach that gets done. We'll maximise the number of vegans.
Yeah, so if you've got kind of like a 3-step kind of thing, and so there seems to be at the moment a problem which blocks moving from step. I mean, let's just assume that we've got some vegans now. Then you've got the problem of moving them to step 2. And then even a bigger problem, it seems to me, to move them to step 3. That one is a really kind of difficult problem to resolve. Some of the things that have happened recently, and some of the kind of things that you've obviously been involved with in terms of debates or disputes and stuff, and some of the stuff that's been going on social media, have pointed out that there are kind of vegan events which seem to potentially damage what you want and what you think is crucial, or even damage or at least don't help. So you took part in a kind of conversation that I chaired, and this statement came up, which is from you.
Yeah.
And this is part of a two-parter. And I put this part up and I split it into 2, because of the word limit, but also because I said, well, this bit is not going to be contentious. And then it ended up being so. And so from vegans of our generation, the idea that this part of your statements is contentious is a bit weird. I think from judging from the response to this is that, well, no, some vegans are just going to these things. It's almost like they're creating a vegan version of Glastonbury, say. Now, my attitude to that is that that's fine, and that would be really good if it was kind of like vegan activists on the summer holidays, as it were, having a blowout like that. But if you're talking about it's non-active vegans at these events, and then the primary purpose must be then surely to encourage them to get active. And so, first of all, these events tend to have a kind of conferencey part of it or the activist part of it. So they might claim that it's catered for. But one weird comment that I heard was that, well, we could attract as many vegans to these events without having any activist content whatsoever. And I thought, well, how would that even be desirable?
Well, it's kind of not, because like kind of why are all those people vegan? I mean, if they're genuinely vegan and not just plant-based, then they'll be vegan because they want animal liberation. Because that's the only way you can be vegan, is to be opposed to the oppression of other animals. It's the only way you can be vegan. So, okay, so like if those people are genuine vegans, they are people that want and believe in animal liberation. So surely they want that to come about. And how is that going to come about unless we educate a lot more people to go vegan? And how are those people to be educated unless a lot more vegans become involved in that education? So it's kind of irrational in a way for those people not to be involved in outreach, because they're not helping to bring about the very thing that they desire.
Yeah, but you're assuming they're not, right? And so a lot of people...
Yes, and I think it's pretty obvious that the vast majority of vegans aren't involved in outreach. I mean, okay, they might have a chat with their friends and say, yes, I'm vegan, and explain to their friends why they're vegan. These conversations always come up.
Well, that's a form of outreach, right?
Yeah, that, in a sense, you could say it was, but I'm really talking about something a bit more than that. I'm talking about making a bit of an effort to kind of get outside of that and go out and spread the vegan message, through leafleting, through information stalls, through whatever events you can be involved in.
And also, door dropping is a big part of what you talk about. And of course, that is kind of like almost, risk-free, as it were. It's not that stressful. You don't necessarily have to talk to anybody unless somebody comes running out saying, what's all this about, I suppose. But so you're not talking about everybody becoming an ALF activist here.
No, not at all. And they don't need to be. I'm talking about everyone kind of getting a little bit outside their comfort zone in terms of going that little bit further to do some outreach. And it can be something as simple as, writing a letter to the local paper every so often promoting veganism. If someone is kind of not able to go out for whatever reason, deliver leaflets, then that's something that they can do, for instance. Pretty much any vegan.
There's still an assumption, though, isn't there, Ronnie, in the sense that you're assuming that most people are non-active.
Yeah, I think that can really quite easily be assumed. And like, if I give an example from my own local vegan group, we've got over 900 members in our local vegan group. They're not all local, and they're not all vegan, because we allow non-vegans to join if they're interested in veganism, because it's a good way of them learning about it. But I'd say we have about 300 local vegans in that group. When we organise any activity, even if it's something as simple as delivering leaflets, asking people to deliver leaflets in their own area, the most we've ever had to do that in one particular campaign, I think, was 30 out of 300. Most times it's far less than that. So you've got it takes to deliver 50 leaflets takes half an hour, right? So you've got the vast majority of those vegans not even prepared to do something as simple and as easy as that they could do in a little bit of spare time that they've got. And so that really indicates to me the serious problem we have. And there are other vegan groups. In fact, I'd say probably most vegan groups in the country, that represent a particular locality, aren't active at all. I mean, in the county where I live, the various towns have vegan groups, and most of them aren't active. Don't do anything.
Well, what you said about the groups and Facebook groups, that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a few Facebook groups in Dublin, and I think a couple of them are up to something like 13,000, 14,000 people, and it would be the same percentage, if not even kind of worse than what you said. But I think some pushback might be, well, Ronnie Lee, you're saying that if we're not doing activism the way you want it done, then we're not activists.
Well, I'd ask them to explain in what way they're doing activism. In what way are they getting out there and spreading the vegan message? I'm not saying those are the only ways of doing activism, but they're, for instance, door dropping or helping an information stall, they're very simple ways of doing activism. They're really quite free of stress, and yet so few people will get involved and help with those things. And I appreciate that people have other things going on in their lives. People have families, people have animals they care for, people have work. And I know that those things, in a sense, have to kind of come first. But it's not that I would be expecting a massive amount from anyone. Like I said, if like a couple of times a month someone went out and, delivered 100 or a couple of hundred leaflets, if all vegans did that, just think of the massive amount of education that would bring about. But that, not even that is happening. Not, people aren't using their spare time in that positive way to actively promote veganism. And I think that's a tragedy, really, because it means that so much potential is being wasted. We have all these hundreds of thousands of vegans now. They all could be active in some way. We would make tremendous strides, I think.
One thing that we were going to talk about in the previous discussion, but we didn't get round to this. Somebody made the point that the big concern in our movement is why, an event is the only thing that vegans are prepared to attend. Now, in large numbers, I suppose people in Surge would kind of point to the Animal Rights March, which is a form of activism, which I suppose the same people would turn up at that, right? Yes.
I think there's a difference. I think the Animal Rights March kind of has been a really great outreach event, because I think there was a bit of I didn't attend the Animal Rights March in London last year. There was some complaints about it that it didn't go through populated areas because it was kind of focused on industries that oppressed animals. So it went to outside offices rather than going through shopping areas, because I think, groups that were involved in organising it were focused on supply rather than demand. But in previous years where I've attended the march, it's been great. It's gone down Oxford Street, it's gone through shopping centres, shopping areas where there's been loads of people, lots of banners and placards that people can see, the public can see, and hundreds, if not thousands of leaflets given out to bystanders. So I think that the Animal Rights March, is a...
Yeah, so those people doing that will be the people who are going camping, right?
I really don't know. Possibly some of them.
The numbers even are similar, aren't they?
The numbers are similar. It doesn't necessarily mean that those are the same people.
No. It's just I'm just thinking about who's there.
Yeah.
Because the last line here is it highlights a very serious problem in the vegan movement, and we're assuming that problem is getting people to go from stage 1 to stage 2 in your kind of thing. Leaving aside for now the even bigger problem of 2 to 3.
Yeah. You see, the other thing I'd say about the Animal Rights March, and whenever I've given a speech at an Animal Rights March, so I've never given one at the big one in London, but I have at some of the regional ones. I've always said it's great, it's wonderful that everyone's come here today, but let's not forget that the oppression of animals carries on every single second of every single day. So what I want people to think about is, what they're going to do when they get back to where they live. Don't just think that you've done enough by just coming today. It's great that you've come today, but think about what you can do in your local area to spread the vegan message and kind of get active there. And that would be my message to people, that because I think there is a problem that people go on an Animal Rights March. I think, right, I've done my activism for this year, and then not do anything else. And that's we need much more than that.
Yeah, well, again, I suppose this is a perennial thing, isn't it? I've known organisers of things for many years, and of course, it's getting the numbers out, which has always been the bugbear for them. And again, this is not even talking about 2 to 3. This is still talking about 1 to 2 to actually get the majority of vegans active to even the limited extent that you're talking about. It's still quite difficult. So the suggestion is presumably that these big set piece events can presumably encourage and motivate people to do. And presumably, I don't know whether there's any evidence of this, but presumably if they go to the big march in London, they might be fired up to do something when they get back. It's a question of whether that ethos is in the movement, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's kind of, it can be like a double-edged sword in a sense, because I think there can be a temptation. People think, well, like I've just said, I've been on this big march. I've kind of done my bit, for animal liberation this year. and then I'll go again next year, but it comes round again, and in the meantime, I won't do anything. On the other hand, yes, I mean, I think there is big potential in those marches for encouraging people to carry on being active. But I think that needs to be said, and that needs to be stated, and it needs to be said by the organisers of the march, and it needs to be said by people making the speeches, that this one day is great. If we're going to achieve animal liberation, it's not enough, and we need people to get active in their local areas to promote veganism there.
Yeah, I wonder whether, Ronnie, that we're still in a problem that now we've got kind of a load of influencers who have kind of taken a lot of the attention off the national groups. So it's almost like you could regard them as another set of national groups, and they're all kind of, if you like, competing for the activist dollar in terms of money and everything. So it seems to me that none of them are trying to kind of empower the grassroots to kind of be, well, revolutionary. And so what they're all doing is a bit counter-revolutionary in the sense that it's almost like back to those days when it was help us to help them, which was used to be on leaflets in back in the day, and it used to infuriate me.
Send us money, basically. That's what
yeah, become a member, send us a donation, and then we'll do the job type of thing. And that used to totally infuriate me because it's so debilitating and so counter-revolutionary in terms of a social movement effort, because the grassroots is always the backbone of every movement. And so we've never really had in our movement, even back in the day, we talk about 60s, 70s, 80s and all that, 90s, we still never had, even then, as a structural matter, a movement which is based on encouraging and then facilitating the growth of the grassroots. And so what we've got now, Ronnie, is just one more decade of that, isn't it?
I kind of think pretty much. I mean, I don't really listen to any of the influencers. I listen to very few of their videos. To what extent they encourage people to get active locally in, with vegan outreach.
Well, the main thing they do is say smash a like and join my Patreon.
Yeah, and I think the danger is that people think that we'll kind of get the idea. I don't need to do anything myself. This vegan superhero that I'm watching will do it all. And it's similar to the kind of the attitude of the nationals, or sending money to the national organisations and they'll do it. Whereas we need to all do it if we're going to educate sufficient people to become vegan. We've all got to be involved in outreach, and I think there is a problem, extension really of celebrity culture, isn't it? Where we do have even in the vegan movement, you see it all the time. They're incredibly pleased, that two finalists knocking a tennis ball around were plant-based or vegan. So obviously groups like Peter have focused on celebrity for decades now. I suppose what they're doing culturally is using what's kind of already there. This is a major problem, that there's an attempt to just change existing, to kind of create a mirror image of existing society and existing culture, but just make it plant-based. And that's the problem, because that is not animal liberation, and that won't bring about animal liberation. All right.
The answer to that, though, Ronnie, from the reducitarians is don't make the problem or the issue even more difficult and bigger than it is.
It's not making the issue more difficult or bigger. It's
just spelling out what the issue is. Yeah,
it's spelling out that animal liberation is animal liberation, and kind of halfway to animal liberation isn't animal liberation. I mean, okay, yeah, we had existing societies. We live in a very decadent, consumerist, selfish. I could carry on with all the words, society. And to just think that just by making that plant-based, that all our problems will be solved and all the problems of the other animals will be solved. That's a million miles from the truth. The changes that we need to make in society are far, far more radical than just substituting.
But again, we're not talking about that in a weird way. We're kind of echoing what you were saying about door dropping, which is this is not much to do. And what we're saying really, in a sense, is that we need a kind of anarchic strand to the movement again. But we're not talking about firebombs or anything. But we're talking about DIY culture, the idea that, you can do it rather than giving your money to somebody else to do it. Do it yourself, because you're the person in your own area, the people, the situation, you're on the ground, as it were. So let's kind of do it. There's a push against that, though, isn't there? There always has been, isn't there?
Yes, and indeed always has been a push against it from organisations that kind of want your money, I suppose, in a sense, and want, rather than people be active themselves, they want the money from those people, and kind of so they can do it on their behalf, but they won't be able to do it. This is the problem. The only way that we can get the vegan message to enough people is for loads of vegans to spread it. That's it's
well, I suppose they might say in response to that, Ronnie, that we never say don't do anything.
That's kind of. It's not a totally black and white situation.
But we're talking about the culture of the movement. That's what
we're talking about. Yeah, what you've got is yes. Some of the national groups do encourage people to door drop. They do kind of have days of action.
It's their leaflets.
Yeah, it's their leaflets. Yes, of course. And so of course they'll get whatever comes from that. And they do encourage. They have national days of action where they want people in different local areas to do things. I think as well, some of the YouTube celebrities have encouraged people to get active and even supplied some materials. So there is that. There is that aspect to it. But overall, that only happens in a tiny way. There's no big efforts to encourage people to get active at a grassroots level.
Well, I suppose we ought to move on to the issue of what would that look like. I suppose we need to kind of have some idea in mind what kind of encouragement would encourage that kind of thing. But going back to mindset in the movement, and going back to the recent disputes about events, one thing that really shocked me was that there was talk about, well, come up with alternatives and we'll think about it. And somebody found out that in these set piece events, which are outside, the cost of the shower units are really expensive. And so someone, and I think it was a completely innocent activist question, was, well, it's only 3 days, why bother with showers? And that created a hilarity in the people responding to that, as though, what planet are you living on type thing. And I was thinking, that's a legitimate kind of activist question. I mean, why spend 30,000 quid on a few showers? That's just one block when you're there for 3 days. But you see, the point is, the question came from an activist mindset. The answer was from a vegan mindset, and this seems to be a really terrible problem.
Yeah, I think because one of them was thinking about, well, attending an activist event. There have been activist events where people have camped out and there's been workshops and discussions. I've been to some of them in the past, like the animal rights gathering, for instance. There's no showers there, and people wash, but they get a bowl and have a kind of rub down. There's no showers there. That's probably what an activist would think of. Whereas the person that replied was thinking more like, well, this is like a holiday. It's a kind of holiday thing. And you go,
well, more like a vegan Glastonbury, I suppose.
Like a kind of, you go to this holiday camp, and of course at a holiday camp you expect there to be showers. So
the last time I went to Glastonbury, which was a long time ago, there wasn't any showers there either. But I kind of get the point. I suppose modern people's expectations are different from, say, ours. And this is where I know I use the phrase boring old thought, but I really do think that maybe we're kind of completely out of touch, really, with the people that are now in the movement. And also, therefore, the idea that we've got any way of talking to them in a language they understand, which would get them from vegan to vegan activist, I just wonder whether we're not able to even talk to them anymore or something.
Well, I think you kind of, the way I talk to them, indeed anyone that I was discussing this with, was to kind of ask them, well, like, you say you're a vegan, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a vegan? What's that all about? And then to see if they've got that right. because veganism is,
well, that's another program we could have.
A lot of people haven't got it right. A lot of people haven't got it right. Veganism isn't just about diet. It's not even just about lifestyle. It's a philosophy, and it's a philosophy of animal liberation. It's a philosophy of being opposed to all oppression and exploitation of other animals, and trying to live as best we can according to that philosophy. That's what being a vegan is. And that's how it was defined. That's how Leslie Cross defined it, wasn't he? The guy that first defined veganism. How it's kind of always been. Do they even really know what it means to be vegan?
The answer to this, Ronnie, and this ties into stuff about activists like us are not known. You were on a podcast and somebody was saying, "Do people know you? Do people know Mel Broughton? Do people know?" And you were going, "No, nobody knows me." Which, for my generation, is shocking that people don't know who Ronnie Lee is and what that means. But to that generation, it's not. You kind of don't. You're not on their radar because it's as though we're talking a different language. We're talking activist language. They want to hear from vegans.
To live according to the definition of veganism, the true definition of veganism, would ultimately lead you to activism.
Do you think though, Ronnie, that's the reason why a lot of these groups that have emerged recently I'm saying that last 5-6 years probably, there's been a big effort to actually change the definition. I mean, first of all, the definition that everybody knows from the Vegan Society, I get pushback for this by calling it's kind of like the official definition. But a lot of the newer activists have tried to slim that down. First of all, they've taken the word philosophy out of it. And secondly, it says exploitation of and cruelty to. They've taken the exploitation bit out of it. And then they've cut out the total end of it where it talks about humans. And so you've left basically with it's a lifestyle that is about cruelty to animals. That's the basic kind of definition that a lot of the new vegans quite like. And when I'm talking to them, that's often what they'll send me. And even worse, something like a dictionary definition. But they'll send me this kind of definition. This is veganism, and they'll say things like, "This is what Donald Watson said in 1944." That bit's not true. But even in relation to the 79 to 88 definition, the one that we all regard as the official one, they don't like the fullness of even that. So asking them about, well, what about the definition? They've probably got in mind this reduced definition anyway. It's about reducing suffering and cruelty.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, veganism is what it is. You can't just
But it isn't for them, Ronnie. It's a generational difference. They're going, well, that was then, this is now.
No, but you can't.
They can. That's what they're doing, though. That's the point.
They're doing that, but it's not legitimate, is it?
We're not going to listen to you. I mean, people have said to me, I don't give a shit about who Tom Reagan is. It doesn't mean anything to me. Donald Watson is an old dead guy.
I would still ask those people, why are you vegan? What's the reason you're vegan? What's the reason you're vegan?
And they'll say, because I love animals and I don't want to be cruel to them.
What I'd say then to
it's like talking to RSPCA members now, Ronnie.
Yeah, kind of, yes. But you see, I would say, well, you want to see an end to all, all cruelty to animals, all oppression of animals. You want that to end. You want people to stop doing those things. And then they say yes. And then they say, well, of course, in order to do that, we've got to educate other people to go vegan. It still leads to the same conclusion, even if they haven't got it totally right, and even if they are saying those things. If they want a world where that no longer happens, then they've got to do vegan education. It still leads to the same thing.
It's interesting because your kind of 3-part thing is even stuck on 1 to 2, and the real problem is 2 to 3. It seems to me, because that is asking people to really step up to the plate, as it were, to use that phrase. Yeah. We haven't found a way of convincing a big majority of vegans to be activists, and we can't even start thinking about encouraging them to go to level 3 of your kind of schema. Until then, and we've not, so we're doing something wrong, aren't we? I mean, to be self-critical here, what we're saying to the modern vegans just they don't listen to us because it doesn't resonate to them.
I think maybe some do. I think that, a very large number don't seem to be taking it on board. But other than just keep repeating what we're saying, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what else we can do, to be honest. And I think it's important to point out that we're not asking anyone to do anything difficult or to do anything complicated.
We are asking them to do more than they seem to want to do.
More than they're doing at the moment, but not massively more. Not massively more. If every vegan just contributed a few hours a month to outreach, we'd be miles ahead of where we are now.
The thing for me, Ronnie, is that I can understand part. I don't agree with supply and demand. We know there's a debate there, but I can understand people like Mel Broughton and other people who kind of looking, and you can see this in Radicals and Revolutionaries, the podcast series. Yeah, they clearly see the modern vegan movement as just made up of a bunch of wimps who don't do all, and there's nothing about them. There's nothing to them. So people who are kind of going out sabbing twice a week and getting knocked about, yes, are then saying they won't even do a few leaflets with Ronnie Lee. These people are just a waste of time now.
Yeah, I can understand that attitude, but I think we still do have to persevere, because I think it is possible to get more vegans to become active. I don't think we're ever going to get the majority of them to become active. But if we could at least get a significant majority to become active, we could.
But you were saying in your own area you're having problems with that, Ronnie.
Yes, I think it's a universal problem. It's worse in
the last few minutes, what can you do to change that? Because
I think all we can do is keep on putting it out there, like we've done in this program, and explaining the importance of getting involved in outreach, explaining that it needn't be complicated. It can be as simple as delivering a few leaflets or helping on an information stall. Even if you've never done it before, go along and see what the other people are doing and learn from them and get confidence, and then you'd be able to do it yourself. These are really simple, low-risk activities that can be very, very effective. So we're not asking people to break in anywhere. We're not asking anyone to be arrested, just to do these kind of simple things that can fit in very, very easily with their everyday life and all the things they're doing already.
So I want to ask you a structural question now, Ronnie. Does that mean then that the structure that we've got, the national group structure and the celebrity structure, that seems to be a major block to what you're standing for as the crucial part of animal liberation now is this three-part idea about expanding and facilitating the grassroots. They are in the way of all that, in the sense that people go, well, I don't have to listen to Ronnie Lee. I'll just sign up to somebody's Patreon or become a life member of this group, and that's me done.
They wouldn't be so much in the way if they massively encouraged and even financed what I'm talking about. I'd like to see, I'm not opposed to people being paid these days.
No, neither am I.
Because, the things have changed when you could do it on the dole like we used to do. It's not so easy. As long as it's like a kind of reasonable amount and, the kind of average wage or whatever, I think that's fine. Now, national organisations could fund people to do that. They could fund regional organisers whose job would be to seed and help and promote and set up local vegan outreach groups. The national organisations could do that. Viva could do it. Animal Aid could do it. The YouTube superstars could do it. Or maybe everyone gets together.
Do you think it's incumbent on them to actually say to their supporters, okay, I've got enough now. Don't send me any more. Put it here instead, or do this instead. Because whenever I see anything on YouTube, it's always the same. Smash a like, subscribe, join my Patreon and all that kind of stuff. No, I don't think anyone has ever said, look, I don't need any more. I've got enough. So let's divert some to X, Y, and Z. I don't see anybody doing that. The national groups don't do it very much.
No.
I mean, Animal Aid used to do that back in the 80s, and so did the BOAV to some extent.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to do it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, either do that or take the funds that they've got and say, right, we're going to use those funds and we're going to employ people on just a reasonable wage to different regional areas. And the job of those people is to help set up local activist groups, local outreach groups. If they were to do that, if they were to use their money in that way.
Yeah, well, again, Ronnie, let me say this, because I mean, I'm agreeing with you here, and I totally know what you're saying, but I think this is another generational difference. If I was offered, if people offered me, I mean, the VIP, my group has got a Patreon. I think we get 50 quid a month or something. If people offered me more than I needed, I'd refuse it. Whereas I've seen influencers now saying that it's actually good for them to be rich because it makes vegans look successful, and it's a different mindset across the board in every single aspect that we're talking about.
But you see,
they don't think like we used to think, Ronnie.
No, but that in itself, that attitude is not in accordance with the vegan ethic. It's not in accordance with the vegan ethic for anyone to have more than they really need.
It's in accordance with the modern world, and that's where they're living. It's in accordance with the
modern world, but if these people are supposed to be vegan, and it's not in accordance with the vegan ethic. Yeah. And I can kind of go into depth and kind of explain more why that's the case, but it's not.
We've almost analysed a problem, but I don't see an issue, and I don't see a resolution, but also I'm not quite sure if we're capable of trying to bring it about, because we're seen as kind of has-beens, and people say that. I mean, somebody was on YouTube calling me a nobody, and so I think that's just the way that we are now.
It depends on kind of people you're dealing with, really, and they're kind of different people in a sense. Like in my local area, the people that kind of help with stalls, the people that do door dropping, they're not really people that are into any of these celebrities. They're kind of just ordinary people that are vegan and just want to do a bit more and are happy to do something very simple that will spread the message. And I think once you get down to kind of, like a local area and you're dealing with, directly with local vegans in that area, then it's a different scenario in a sense. And kind of in a way, that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like when it comes down to community level, then you'll find vegans that aren't really into any of that.
It's a scale thing. I mean, the only frustrating thing about that point for me is that those people who are supportive of local groups and they will fund and help, the local activists, they're still donating to the big groups as well, which has always kind of baffled me a little bit, because they're almost, well, I suppose they're just going, well, look, I'm just trying to help everyone wherever and whatever, that kind of thing.
Well, it's like this, what is it? The squeakiest wheel gets the oil or whatever, because they're kind of is that
gets the attention.
Yes, that's right, because they're big and like yes, and I mean yes, I think it's very tempting for people to say, well, I'll send them, I've got a few bob here to spare, I'll send it off to like a national group, and I think that's why that if we were going to have, we were going to kind of try to get the funds to the grassroots. Instead of to these, the national organisations and, to the people that are making huge amounts of money through their Patreon and stuff like that. Not you, you're 50 quid, but the ones that we kind of have to have something that exists to some extent at a national level, is something that can be seen at a national level by people that want to donate the money. In other words, like have some kind of federation where there's like a central address for that federation that people can donate to, but it's just a question of who would set that up and who would organise it, and that's where the problem.
Yeah, well, we've spoken about this idea for a long time. I mean, Federation of Local Vegan Groups has been around since.
It would be brilliant, but I think it needs somebody to say, right, I'm going to take that up, I'm going to organise it. Like with a lot of these things, it's all down to kind of one or two people to kind of get hold of it and kind of get it going. And
the real issue, though, Ronnie, is that even if you set that up, would you have anybody even applying to it? Because we've still got the problem. I mean, we've not had time to even go on to your 3 point, and they'll be the ones who go, okay, so there's this fund, veg fund. I mean, there is things like that.
Yes.
But then they're not applying to that because, I mean, this is almost like what academics complain about. Their students are not very radical anymore. There is a change in the people are not as radical. And, I mean, even in the vegan movement, what's regarded as being militant now is almost a little bit of a smirk to us, right? And so, but the point is, we are where we are, and we're with the people that we have, and they're just different people from what was before. Are we trying to impose an old-fashioned idea on new people?
I think we've kind of got to go back to, the idea of what we need to do, and that we do need to.
But that's the old-fashioned idea, though, Ronnie.
Well, yes, but it's kind of it's the only way it's going to happen.
Well, just because it's the best way, it doesn't stop it being the old-fashioned way, and for that reason itself, it's not very attractive, is it?
Yeah, there may be people that kind of don't find that attractive because it's not glitzy, not exciting in terms of what they. I mean, the things that they regard as exciting, I kind of would derive no pleasure from those things. I'd rather sit.
Well, that's because you're a boring old fart like me, Ronnie. That's why. You see, we're highlighting all the time. There's a generational difference now.
Are we boring old farts? Are we just people that are kind of, attempting to live ethically and attempting to, live truly according to vegan principles?
Well, I'd prefer your definition as you just stated it, them boring old farts. But I'm saying, in the eyes of the people who are the majority in our movement now, we are. I think we're kind of, we were back then, and we're not anymore. We don't register.
There isn't a lot we can do about people who think that. There isn't a lot we can really do about those people. All we can do is keep promoting what it is that we believe in, promoting the way we see as how animal liberation will be achieved. And I think that's kind of all we can do is keep on promoting it, keep on stating it.
Videos out saying, please listen to me, I'm still relevant.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of that's all we can do, isn't it? I mean, what else can we, what else can we do? We just got to keep on stating that as often as possible and hope that enough people listen that will make a difference. And that's all we can do. I don't think you can worry too much about what other people are saying and what other people are doing. I think you just could kind of just focus on.
I'm more talking about not what they're saying and doing is what they're thinking. I'm talking about the fact that we're dealing with a new set of people that don't seem to understand us much, and we don't understand them much. And so the idea of a kind of constructive dialogue between the two doesn't seem to be. See, that's what I'm saying. All the time, these examples that we've given, the activists talking to the vegans, it's just seen as shouty and kind of complaining and everything. There's no dialogue between the two.
For me, it's not shouty. I mean, for me, it's just talking to people and asking them, what is it you want? Why are you vegan? What is it you want? And let's talk about how we're going to achieve that. You're getting right back to basics, as the Tories would say. Because that, in a sense, that's all what it's all about. If the reason they're vegan is because they care about other animals, they don't want them to be oppressed. If that's the reason they're vegan, and if that's not the reason they're vegan, then they're not vegan anyway, right? But if they're genuinely vegan, that's what they believe in. Then okay, let's.
Won't they just say, yes, that's the reason. I agree with you on that, and I'm doing it the way that it now needs to be done in the modern age.
But if we're going to educate far more people to become vegan, which we have to do if we're ever going to really change things, how do we go about that? And let's discuss how we go about that. How do we actually, spread that education sufficiently in order to achieve that? I mean, that's a discussion to have. It isn't kind of an argument. I mean, if you can kind of get an agreement with someone that they also believe in animal liberation, then you can say, well, okay, we both believe in animal liberation.
There's no doubt about it, though, Ronnie, that every single person turning up at these contentious to us events, perhaps, will all say yeah, of course we are.
Yeah, well, then let's have a discussion and say, okay, we've agreed on something. We both want animal liberation. Because it isn't just a discussion, I think, to be had with non-active vegans. I think it's a discussion to also be had with people who believe in pressure campaigning, with people who go for supply instead of demand. It's a discussion also to be had with them.
Well, one thing that caused a bit of consternation on the commentary of your last kind of conversation was when they found out that you'd been to this event yourself.
Yes.
I suppose they're saying, well, there you are then, we're facilitating.
Yeah, but it's not, that's kind of totally irrelevant to the question I was asking. Because basically there was controversy over the location of
Oh yeah, but I don't really want to get into that. I'm just talking about the fact that they were saying, well, look, we're facilitating what you want, which is we're giving you an opportunity to encourage people to do what you want them to do.
Yeah, but you see, the fact that I spoke at a particular event doesn't preclude me from suggesting that event could be held in a more ethical way.
Yeah. I don't want you to move on to that bit. I want you to stick with the idea that they're saying, well, look, we facilitated what you wanted. We gave you an activist space within our festival. And so, I mean, they might say, how was that? I mean, you must have got loads of feedback. I mean, are people now saying, because of that, I'm an activist now, or, I've started to organize something? Or
to be quite honest, I don't think any of us ever gets much feedback from any of those things, to be honest. And you just hope that somehow it's made a difference. And I think that, yes, it probably did make a difference to some people. We don't get much feedback, when we do information stores, when we do door dropping things like that, you don't get much feedback from people. You just know that if you do enough of that, people will go vegan.
So to some extent, then, these events are doing what you want them to do, which is to create a space where you could say what you said at that event.
It's not a black and white situation. It isn't a situation where these events are totally bad, right? And neither is a situation that these events are totally good. I think there's positive aspects about events like that, and there are other aspects that aren't so positive. And I think what we've got to do is increase the positive and reduce the negative.
Depending on how you define those things, yeah. So, Ronnie, we're out of time. So, what I want you to do to finish, if possible, is just give us, within 2 minutes, if that's okay, a kind of summary of your thoughts about where could we go from here, as it were.
Where we could go, I think, there's a very important word for me, and that's the word unless. In other words, we're not going to achieve animal liberation unless certain things happen. And so whatever else people are doing in terms of campaigning for animals, unless this particular thing also happens, we're not going to achieve animal liberation. And unless that I'm talking about is vegan education. And we need vegan education as much as possible and in every possible location as often as possible, so that we can educate as many people as possible to go vegan. And it's really important that all vegans try to become involved in that, because after all, if someone's, as I said before, if someone's genuinely vegan, they're a person that wants animal liberation. And so how is animal liberation going to be achieved unless we educate a large number of non-vegans to go vegan? And if those people aren't going to be part of it, then how is it going to be achieved? It's not going to happen by magic.
One issue about that particular point, and I'm glad we finished on this, is that I think it'd be really good for people to remember when they join the vegan movement, they're joining a campaigning movement. It's not just, whatever they think it is. It's a campaigning movement, and it's not been going that long either. So it's not as though we can sit back or anything. We've got to push forward. So on that one, I would totally agree with you that because there seems to be almost like we're a big movement now, and that might have created some kind of weird complacency in some weird way. Whereas we're not a big movement compared with the fact that other animals have been tortured on a massive scale.
The reason not to be complacent is that it's actually getting worse. it's getting worse because more animals are being slaughtered for food all the time in the world because the human population is increasing, and also there are countries that used to be primarily plant-based that are now increasingly consuming animal products. We haven't turned anything round. It's still going in the wrong direction, and that's yet another reason for more vegan education.
Yeah, well, turning a juggernaut round is a difficult thing, and animal rights violations, in my language, is a juggernaut. And the idea of stopping it and then turning it around, we've got a big thing. So I'd agree with you. We've got a fight on our hands, and so are you a fighter, as it were, or a spectator? I suppose
that's right. Because I mean, what I'd say is, as far as we know, we're only here once. We've only got one life. We're born into a world where this horrendous oppression of other species by our own species, and in particular the individual versus those species, because all individual sentient animals are important. To not do anything about that, to live all our lives and not do anything about that, that's kind of a waste of our lives in a sense. We turned a blind eye to this horrific situation that's going on. And it's great that people, say, well, I don't want to be part of that. I'm not going to consume animal products. I'm not going to go to the zoo, the circus. I'm not going to take part in hunting. I'm not going to be part of that. It's great when people say that. But we kind of need more than that, because there's this example, isn't there, of you see a guy kicking a dog. What do? Do you join in with the guy kicking the dog? Do you walk past and think, aren't I good? I don't kick my dog. Or do you try to stop the guy kicking the dog? There's only one truly ethical reaction to that, and that is to try in whatever way you can to stop the guy kicking the dog. And it's the same, the people.
Well, some people have suggested that number two in that is veganism, which I reject.
I would say that really veganism should be number three.
Number three.
And we talk about
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in veganism that would limit it to number two in that scenario at all.
No. And we say that like it depends on people's definition of veganism, and it's said that veganism is the moral baseline, but I would actually say that vegan activism is the moral baseline. To be honest. Well,
that's okay. So long as you don't miss up the vegan thing. Very, very last word, because we are terribly over time. I've been terrible timekeeper, but we've been talking about mindsets and everything. This is the final point, Ronnie. Do you think the new vegans, as we've described them, coming into the movement now, understand they're joining a cause? Do you think that's true?
I think some do and some don't. I think some.
And is that the difference between the activists and the not?
I think it maybe is. I think some of them think they're kind of partaking in a particular lifestyle, but it kind of really goes down to the reason they're doing it. And the question I'd say is like, why did you decide to go vegan? What's the reason you decided to go vegan? And then, if they say, as they should say, if they're genuinely vegan, well, it's because, I don't want to, I don't want to see animals oppressed. I don't want to see animals suffer and be killed.
But rather than thinking of that as a cause, they're thinking of it as a lifestyle now.
They're thinking that like how I deal with that, how I react to that, is by adopting this particular lifestyle where I don't consume animal products, and then they think, well,
and arguably that is a form of activism, right?
Well, it's kind of.
And I know it's a lower level than you would like, Ronnie, but it is that, isn't it?
If I was a mugger, say, I spent all my life as a mugger, and then one day I said, right, I'm no longer going to be a mugger. Is that a form of activism, me refusing to be a mugger? I don't think it is it? And it's the equivalent.
Well, there's a lot more going on, though, in veganism than just kind of. It's not just a question of quitting something, because you're proactive every time you buy something as a vegan. You're proactive every time you ask a question, even if it is in limited circumstance. So I think that we have to allow that that's a form of activism. I know you don't like it, but I think it's the lowest kind of level of activism, I think.
Well, I mean, whether
I know you don't like it, you're very uncomfortable about that. But I think
whether that's considered as activism or not, I think it's obvious that we we
need to do more.
rather more than that.
Yeah.
We all have to do.
I think on that note, we need to do more. We can end this and also agree on that. So this has been one of my incredibly occasional podcasts on human-non-human relations, which is something that I do very, very infrequently nowadays. And so I think the last one was forever ago. But anyway, we've done this one. Thanks very much, Ronnie. I think it's interesting that we've definitely identified an issue, and then it's a question of how it's going to resolve itself, if it's going to resolve itself. So this is me struggling to come up with a kind of semi-hopeful ending.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've just got to keep on keeping on saying what we're saying and hoping that
keeping on. There must be a song called that, I think.
There probably is. We could make one up, Roger, if not.
No, we're not going to be doing that. So it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from him. So thanks a lot, Ronnie. You take care, and no doubt our paths will cross yet again. They seem to be doing it more and more frequently nowadays. So you take care, yeah?
You take care, mate, and bye, everyone, and get out there and spread the vegan message.